You know that smug little fun fact you keep in your back pocket for parties? The one that makes you sound like the only person in the room who didn't sleep through 10th grade social studies. It didn't happen. Not even close. Today, we aren't just setting the record straight, we are torching the entire archive. We've handpicked 10 of history's most obnoxious, deep-rooted deceptions, exposed, dismantled, and left in the dirt. Your version of the past ends right here. Number 1. The 30-minute cramp clock. Every mother on the face of the earth has issued the same grim ultimatum at some point. Finish your sandwich, then sit on that burning concrete for exactly 30 minutes before touching the water. The penalty? Allegedly instant cramps, digestive chaos, and a one-way ticket to the bottom of the deep end. Sports researchers have put this claim through the ringer for decades and debunked it every single time. While trying to run a marathon immediately after an 8-course banquet might cause some mild bloating, the actual medical danger of swimming after a snack has never once been documented. Generations of children spent their entire summer staring longingly at perfectly good pools for a medical reason that was nothing more than a parental myth. Every mom was confidently, totally wrong. Number 2, the Christmas strategic calendar. December 25th, the birthday of Jesus. It's a date circled by billions of people every year with absolute certainty. Here's the problem. The Bible doesn't mention a date, not once. In fact, the specific details it does provide, shepherds keeping watch over their flocks in open fields at night, suggest a setting far closer to spring than the dead of winter. So why the 25th? The early church made a cold, calculated marketing move. The Romans already had a massive, rowdy festival called Saturnalia, a week of feasting, gift-giving, and general mayhem that peaked right around late December. Rather than try to cancel the biggest party in the empire, the church simply dropped a major holy day directly on top of it. The date wasn't a discovery, it was a strategic scheduling decision that the world has been honoring for nearly 2 millennia. Number 3, the Einstein failure. This is the lie that has been the ultimate security blanket for struggling students for over a century. The idea that even Albert Einstein, the greatest scientific mind to ever live, couldn't pass basic math as a child. It's the perfect hang-in-there story, except for the fact that Einstein never failed math. By the age of 15, he had already mastered advanced calculus and differential equations. The myth actually stems from a literal lost-in-translation moment. When Einstein was in school in Switzerland, the grading system was flipped. A 6 was the highest mark, and a 1 was the lowest. Someone saw a 1 next to mathematics on his transcript and told the world he was a failure, when in reality he had pulled the highest grade possible. The most comforting narrative in education was built on a clerical error, and we've been using it to justify bad report cards ever since. Number 4, the 10% brain capacity. We only use 10% of our brains. The other 90% is just dark matter, a vast reservoir of untapped genius waiting for a magic pill or a cinematic plot twist to unlock it. Entire Hollywood franchises have been built on this premise, but modern neuroscience has made it impossible to defend. Brain imaging shows that virtually every single region of the brain has a documented function. Over the course of a standard 24-hour day, essentially 100% of your brain fires up at some point. The 10% figure likely came from a misunderstanding of glial cells, which outnumber neurons and provide support, or simply from the fact that we don't use every part of our brain simultaneously, which would actually just be a massive seizure. The myth survived because it's a better story than the truth.
Number 5. The Caesar salad's Roman holiday. The name Caesar salad conjures images of ancient Rome, marble pillars, and a recipe whispered through the centuries from the kitchens of emperors. In reality, it was invented in 1924 in Tijuana, Mexico. An Italian-Mexican restaurant owner named Caesar threw the dish together during a frantic 4th of July weekend because his kitchen was nearly wiped out of supplies. He tossed together what he had left, romaine, garlic, croutons, and parmesan, and served it tableside to keep the customers happy. There was no Rome, no ancient tradition, and no imperial decree. It was a last-minute improvisation by a guy with empty shelves that somehow convinced the world it was a relic of the ancient world. Number 6. The Great Pastry Heist. The croissant, the very soul of French identity in edible form. It's the pastry that arrives at the table acting like it owns Paris. Except the croissant is actually Austrian. Its ancestor, a pastry called a Kipferl, has been a staple in Vienna since at least the 13th century. The signature crescent shape was actually a deliberate military insult designed to celebrate a victory over the Ottoman Empire, whose flag featured that very same crescent. An Austrian officer opened a bakery in Paris in the 1830s, introduced the Kipferl, and the French refined the dough into the flaky masterpiece we know today. They gave it a French name, claimed it as their own, and never looked back. France didn't invent the croissant. They pulled off the most delicious theft in history. Number 7. The California Fortune Cookie. The fortune cookie is served at the end of every Chinese-American meal like an ancient wisdom-filled tradition from the East. But if you go to China looking for one, you'll be met with blank stares. The cookies were actually invented in California in the early 1900s, likely by a Japanese-American immigrant in San Francisco or a Chinese-American businessman in Los Angeles. When they were finally introduced to China in the 1990s, they weren't welcomed as returned heritage. They were treated as bizarre American novelties. The most recognizable symbol of authentic Chinese dining in the West was actually made in the USA by people the mainland had never even heard of. Number 8. Washington and the Cherry Tree. The story of young George Washington, the boy who could not tell a lie. He chopped down the tree, confessed to his father immediately, and the moral bedrock of a new nation was formed. It's a beautiful story, and it is 100% fake. The tale was fabricated entirely by a biographer named Mason Locke Weems after Washington's death. Weems knew that a gritty, realistic biography wouldn't sell nearly as many copies as a legendary tale of virtue. There was no tree, there was no hatchet, and there was no dramatic confession. A man wrote a piece of fiction, slapped the word biography on the cover, and accidentally created the most enduring myth in American history. Number 9. The Unwashed Middle Ages. The standard image of the medieval period is 1,000 years of accumulated grime, mud-covered peasants, and people who had never seen a bar of soap. Every movie set in the Middle Ages sells this version of history with total confidence. But the reality is that medieval people were actually quite obsessed with hygiene. Public bathhouses were common in cities across Europe, soap was a major commercial industry, and contemporary medical texts specifically linked cleanliness with health. The dirty peasant trope was largely a Victorian-era invention. People in the 1800s wanted to feel scientifically and culturally superior to their ancestors, so they rewrote the past as a cesspool. Medieval people weren't feral. They just had a much colder, more difficult way of getting the water into the tub. Number 10. The Buried Pirate Map. A tattered map where X marks the spot. A heavy iron chest buried in the sand of a remote tropical island, waiting for a brave soul to dig it up. This is the blueprint for every pirate story ever told, and it is almost entirely nonsense. Pirates lived high-risk, short-term lives. They had zero interest in long-term savings accounts buried in the dirt. Whenever they stole loot, it was divided among the crew immediately and spent even faster at the nearest port on booze, gambling, and gear. The only reason we believe this is because of Captain William Kidd, who buried some treasure as a desperate legal bargaining chip before his execution. He was a bizarre outlier, but storytellers took his one-time move and turned it into the universal rule for the entire golden age of piracy. History isn't a collection of facts, it's a collection of stories that were simply told well enough to stick. We remember the unsinkable Titanic because the irony makes for a better headline. We remember the failed Einstein because it makes us feel better about our own struggles.
The truth is usually messier, less cinematic, and far more human than the legends we've been sold.